In the crushing silence of the North Atlantic, nearly 5 kilometers below the surface, rests a steel colossus that for months was the terror of the seas. The Bismarck, pride of the German Navy in World War II, was not just a ship, it was a declaration of power. But when it was finally struck down in 1941, the deep waters swallowed not only the vessel but also a mystery that would endure for decades. What really caused it to sink? Decades later, the search for answers would drive scientists, military officers, and explorers to descend into the depths where no light reaches. And it was there, amid the eternal darkness, that an underwater drone transmitted images that still divide experts today. What those cameras revealed was not just a fragment of history frozen in time, but a disturbing vision that raised new questions, some so unsettling that many wished they had never surfaced. Throughout this video, you will follow the behind-the-scenes story of the hunt for the Bismarck, understand how this naval giant became the target of the greatest maritime pursuit of World War II, and most importantly, uncover what explorers saw in its ruins, something that not only shocked historians but also reignited theories about its true end. To grasp the impact of what was found, we need to return to 1941, when the Bismarck emerged as the single greatest threat to British naval dominance. The Bismarck was launched in 1939, a war machine designed to withstand the worst the enemy could throw at it. With side armor up to 32 centimeters thick and 8 380mm main guns, it was practically a floating fortress. In Nazi propaganda, it embodied the promise that no British ship could face it on equal terms. That confidence seemed justified on May 24, 1941, when the Bismarck encountered HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy. The clash lasted less than 10 minutes. A precise shot from the Bismarck struck Hood's ammunition magazine, causing the ship to explode and split in two before the eyes of the entire British fleet. In a matter of seconds, 1,415 crewmen vanished into the Atlantic, leaving only 3 survivors. For the British, the destruction of the Hood was more than a military defeat. It was a symbolic wound. The United Kingdom was determined to avenge its ship and would stop at nothing. What followed was a relentless manhunt. As the Bismarck headed toward the French coast to make repairs, dozens of British ships were mobilized. Reconnaissance aircraft, cruisers, and aircraft carriers scoured the Atlantic in search of its location. The fate of the war at sea seemed to hang in the balance. On the night of May 25, Swordfish torpedo bombers attacked the German giant. Most torpedoes failed, but a single strike was enough to seal the ship's fate. The rudder was hit and jammed in a critical position. From that moment on, the Bismarck lost its greatest weapon, mobility. The following night, British destroyers surrounded the vessel, firing torpedoes and preventing any chance of repair. And on the morning of May 27th, what remained of the British fleet delivered the final blow. More than 700 heavy shells were fired at the Bismarck, reducing it to a burning shadow. At 10:40 that morning, the ship slipped beneath the waves. Of the more than 2,200 crewmen, only 114 survived. The Bismarck had fallen, but not in silence. The doubt about its true cause of death began right there. For British public opinion, the Bismarck had been sunk by the might of the Royal Navy, perfect revenge for the loss of the Hood. But among the German survivors, a different version spread, that the crew had opened valves, destroyed internal compartments, and even detonated explosive charges to ensure the ship would not be captured. This suspicion raised an uncomfortable question. Was the Bismarck truly defeated in battle, or was it sunk by the very men who commanded it? For decades, there was no way to know. The ship lay buried in deep waters, inaccessible to the technology of the time. Accounts piled up, but concrete evidence remained hidden, until 1989. That year, explorer Robert Ballard, the same man who had found the Titanic, led an expedition to the estimated location of the wreck. Using an underwater drone called ARGO, he scoured the darkness in search of clues. When the first metallic echoes appeared on the monitors, the tension on board was palpable. With each meter advanced, fragments of a frozen tragedy came into view: steel plates, twisted guns, debris scattered across the seafloor. But when the drone captured the full image of the hull, the researchers noticed something that contradicted decades of military conviction. The main armor was almost completely intact. There were no signs that shells or torpedoes had pierced the ship's vital points. What Ballard and his team were seeing was not the image of a vessel torn apart by enemy fire. It was something different, and in a way, far more disturbing. The revelation that the Bismarck's hull was largely intact not only shocked the explorers, but cast doubt on the official narrative that had stood for nearly 50 years. After all, how could a ship struck by hundreds of shells, targeted by torpedoes, and battered by relentless explosions rest at the bottom of the ocean with so few visible scars on its main armor. It was as if the vessel had surrendered to the depths not by enemy force, but by deliberate choice. As the underwater drone transmitted live images, the crew of the support ship watched in absolute silence. Some showed expressions of disbelief, others whispered to each other, but everyone felt the same thing: they were facing something that could rewrite history. The myth of the overwhelming British victory, the triumph that avenged the Hood and restored morale to the Royal Navy, was beginning to crumble. Among German survivors, old testimonies took on new weight. Many had claimed that orders were given to open the scuttling valves and detonate charges inside, precisely to prevent the Bismarck from being captured and studied by the British. A common practice in extreme situations, known as scuttling. But to confirm that act on one of the most powerful warships in naval history was to admit that the British victory had not been as absolute as believed. And that, for many, was simply unacceptable. The dilemma grew with each new image. The drone revealed entire sections of the hull without penetrations, gun turrets still in place, and even corridors preserved by the icy depths. It did not look like a ship shattered by war, but like a colossus carefully delivered to the sea. This unsettling detail raised an even more uncomfortable question. If the Bismarck was not destroyed by British artillery, why were so many lives lost? The final battle was a bloodbath. Men burned, crushed, dragged into freezing water. Hundreds pleaded for rescue, but were ignored or left adrift in the name of haste and fear of lurking German submarines. If the ship was indeed deliberately scuttled by its own sailors, much of that massacre had been, in large part, unnecessary. The historians who accompanied the expedition began to diverge in their interpretations. Some argued that, even intact, the ship would not have withstood the accumulated damage for much longer. Others insisted that the structural integrity revealed by the drone was undeniable proof that the Bismarck had not fallen to enemy fire, but rather to an internal decision. This division reflected more than just a technical debate. It was the clash between two sides of collective memory: British pride and German honor. As the images quietly circulated among experts, more questions arose. If the Germans really had scuttled their own ship, why did so many survivors report internal explosions? What exactly had been activated inside before the final submersion? And most importantly, why did some sections of the interior show signs of destruction that didn't match shell or torpedo impacts? It was as if something else had taken place during the Bismarck's final minutes, something never revealed in official reports. British documents from the time, many still classified, add another layer of suspicion. Among telegrams and logbooks, there are records of officers ordering that any mention of the true state of the hull be carefully omitted from public reports. This attempt to silence certain details would, years later, fuel conspiracy theories. Had the Royal Navy fabricated part of the narrative to protect its image? But the real shock came when the drone advanced into areas that had remained unexplored until then. The inner corridors, swallowed by darkness, revealed strange marks, signs of explosions that had not come from the outside, but from within. Twisted panels, crushed structures in irregular patterns, as if small, controlled charges had been detonated at strategic points. This detail seemed to confirm the German account. The Bismarck had been deliberately sabotaged by its own crew before surrendering to the depths. Yet, amid these discoveries, something even more disturbing emerged. In one of the camera feeds, as the drone glided down a side corridor, the light reflected off objects that seemed unrelated to the ship's structure. Smaller metallic forms, almost cylindrical, that still divide opinions to this day. Some specialists believe they were fragments of the vessel's internal armament, torn free in the final impact. Others argue they were artifacts added later, at some uncertain point in time, as if someone had returned to the wreck to remove or insert something. That last hypothesis is the most controversial. Because if it were true, it would mean the wreck of the Bismarck had not remained untouched since 1941, but had instead been tampered with at some later date. And that opens the door to an even darker theory, that there were secrets on board which could never be allowed to surface. As the cameras continued transmitting, the atmosphere among the exploration team shifted between fascination and unease. Each new discovery seemed to pull them further away from the official history and deeper into uncertain territory, where facts and mysteries blurred. And deep down, everyone knew something greater still awaited. The drone was about to enter the most well-preserved section of the Bismarck, the one that could finally answer, or multiply, all the questions. And it was at that moment, just as the tension became unbearable, that the monitors on board displayed images no one expected. What appeared on screen not only defied the logic of war, but unsettled even the most experienced of the explorers. The drone passed through the final corridors until it reached the ship's best-preserved area, the command room. The cameras revealed consoles buried in sediment, levers frozen in time, and metal structures that seemed to have been locked in the very instant of destruction. But there was something no one expected to find. Amid the wreckage, partially hidden by a collapsed wall, the drone revealed what appeared to be an extra compartment, not listed on any official schematics of the Bismarck. A narrow space, concealed behind a reinforced steel layer. As the camera moved inside, silence fell over the explorers. Within the compartment were metallic cylinders with unusual markings, some still bearing legible inscriptions. They were not conventional weapons, nor recognizable naval equipment. They were objects whose presence raised more questions than answers. The images were immediately recorded and transmitted for analysis, but the reactions on board were pure astonishment. One historian whispered that he had never seen any reference to such a compartment in official documents. Another noted that the cylinders bore no resemblance to anything within the standard arsenal of the Kriegsmarine. Were they experiments? Prototypes? Or something so secret it was never catalogued at all? This discovery revived an old theory, that the Bismarck was carrying more than sheer firepower. Some speculate the ship may have been transporting strategic documents, experimental technologies, or even highly sensitive information for the Third Reich, cargo that could never be allowed to fall into enemy hands. If that were true, the desperate effort to sink her intact would make sense. It wasn't about defeat, but about denial. But there was another, even more unsettling detail. In the compartment, near the cylinders, the drone captured signs of targeted explosions, almost as if internal charges had been placed to seal the space permanently. This suggested that in those final moments, someone may have received direct orders: destroy the evidence, erase every trace, and leave behind only ruins. The dilemma grew deeper. The official story claimed the Bismarck sank after being destroyed by the Royal Navy. But the images showed something else: an almost intact hull, controlled internal detonations, and a secret compartment that should never have existed. The unavoidable question was, what exactly was being protected? The images of this discovery were later analyzed by specialists, but consensus never came. While some argued they were merely remnants of conventional armaments, others believed the compartment concealed secrets that could reshape our understanding of World War II. The lack of official transparency, and the fact that many documents remain classified to this day, only fuels this uncertainty. What is certain is that from that moment on, the Bismarck ceased to be merely a symbol of naval power. It became an enigma, a puzzle that blends historical fact, political manipulation, and unresolved mysteries. The drone that descended into the wreckage did more than deliver striking images of a sleeping giant. It ignited new suspicions about what was truly at stake in that battle. And in the end, what terrifies is not just what was seen, but what remains hidden. Because perhaps we will never know the full truth. Perhaps the story of the Bismarck was shaped not only by the victors, but also by those who deliberately erased certain traces, forever.